It's nice to be here this morning. It's been a long time since I've been back to Richardson, so it's nice to see friendly, welcome, familiar faces. The hymn that we just sang, Open My Eyes, O Lord, may seem like a strange hymn to sing for Advent. We're singing carols and about the Christmas story, and it kind of doesn't seem to fit, but yet it does. It was one that I requested that we sing, because I think that we sometimes only see, from time to time, small glimpses of truth, and never the whole picture. And those small glimpses that we see help to inform our understanding. And so I think that sometimes we tend to see the things we want to see, or we tend to see the things we've been taught to see, that has been influenced by our background, by our family, all of the things that influence our thinking. And that's why this morning, I think that since this is a season of joy and love and peace, that we want to have our eyes wide open to see whatever it is that we can see. And sometimes to see more clearly, I think we have to empty ourselves of all of the clutter and all that's going on around us, and just create this sacred space for the presence of the Divine Spirit. So I encourage all of us, including me this morning, to relax, let go of our preconceived ideas, of our worries, of our burdens, let go of the thoughts of what's going to be happening this afternoon, and just rest in the Spirit. Because somewhere deep inside of us, at our very core, there is that spirit of truth and light that informs us daily. And so I pray that we may see our own glimpses of truth this morning as we share together. C.S. Lewis once said, "A glimpse is not a vision. But if you are walking on a mountain road at night, sometimes the glimpse of 3 feet immediately in front of you is more important than the vision of a horizon." So even if it's glimpses that we catch this morning, I pray that God will bless us. I imagine that most of us have heard the Christmas story, have read it. It's even printed in our bulletin this morning, hundreds of times. And we're very familiar with that Christmas story. It can be told in many ways. It can be told as a story of darkness that turns into light. It can be told of a family that anticipates God's coming. It can be told as endless waiting, or dramatization, or even as a metaphor. And my thoughts this morning are going to be shaped around the Advent theme that has run throughout Christian history, throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, and even until our day and time and us today. And as we remember in the Old Testament, we see the rise and fall of the Hebrew people over and over again. And as they are anticipating something new, and then they're falling, and then they're going through that threshold of anticipation and newness of life again. So I'm not going to tell the story in exactly the form that we might expect. I'm not going to tell each event that happens and how that goes through the whole line of the story, but I'm going to talk about the theme of Advent, the thread that runs through all of Christian history, and that thread still informs us. That thread of God's love that is the advent, the anticipation of what's new and ahead of us. Our scripture this morning is Psalm 126. And you have it printed also in your bulletin. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter, and our tongue with shouts of joy. Then it was said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us, and we rejoiced. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the watercourses in the Negev. May those who sow in tears reap with shouts of joy. Those who go out weeping, bearing the seed for sowing. And they shall come home with shouts of joy, carrying their sheaves. The context and the time of this, when it was written, was about the time, close to the time, that the Jews, the Hebrews, were coming back to Jerusalem after they had been in captivity in Babylonia. And so it is about their return, and returning to their homeland, but not homes, because they had no future homes left to go back to. They had been forced to go into captivity many years before that, and they left everything that they valued, their worship, their temple, their sacred customs, their lifestyle, their land. They had lost it all when they had gone into captivity in Babylon. But now they're returning home, and they're crossing a new threshold as they return to their homeland. I cannot begin to imagine the despair and the devastation that they felt at that time. But now, after many years, they're returning. And this psalm that I just read is about their anticipation, their joy for the future. In spite of all of the burdens of deprivation and oppression, they dared to dream big and think that there was something bright, perhaps lying in their future now. In the book, God of Hunger, John Curvin writes, "We ask too little of life. We dream too small. We stand at open gateways into the divine, but we forever hesitate. We hold back. We are satisfied with the view through the cracks in the wall." I think that the Hebrew people were evidently not satisfied with the view in the cracks in the wall. They were anticipating the possibility of a bright future, yet they did not know what they would find when they returned. But now they're remembering that God has been with them in the past and will be with them in the future. And since their livelihood was dependent upon their livestock and their crops and the water that was needed to grow those, they were asking that God restore their watercourses in the Negev. They see themselves as having been in a land that was dry and parched, and they long for that water to flow again, both physically and spiritually, that their thirst might be quenched. It talks about sowing and reaping. Sowing seed is done in the lean times as well as in the good times, but it always represents hope and joy in the fact that at some time it will be reaped and there will be a harvest. And so their song in 126 is a song of joy and celebration for the anticipated harvest. I once heard a true story about a refugee camp in Central America. And this was during the time of the civil wars, the unrest, and people were fleeing to refugee camps for safety. And in one of the refugee camps, it was nearing Christmas, and the children in the camp made tiny little miniature nativity scene characters out of the mud from the river or little scraps of paper that they could find. And on Christmas Eve, they all gathered and celebrated. They celebrated the joy of Christmas. And there was an aid worker that was present there, and she asked them, how can you celebrate in the condition in which you're living? How can there be joy and celebration? And they said, what we do when we get to a refugee camp, we form 4 committees. One for food, one for sanitation, one for educating the children, and one for celebration. To them, celebration was just as important as the other daily chores that they had to carry on. I think that as we look at the thread that's running through the scriptures, Psalm 126 describes the lives of most of us today. There are times when we have our ups and our downs, and sometimes we find ourselves in front of thresholds that we have to cross, that we might hesitate to cross. We may have to go through rough times and difficulty and feel despair and hopelessness. But somewhere deep inside of us, in that core, in that center of our being, there is a center of joy and peace that's mostly hidden. The peace that is where God's presence resides in us. And it is the current of love that flows within us at our very core, no matter what we're going through, if we can discover it. I attended a retreat recently, and the presenter, Paula Darcy, who has written several books, told the story of when she was at a retreat, giving the retreat, and there was a lake, and so early in the morning she got up and she walked and went down to the lake and just kind of stood there to meditate and think. And there was a man in a kayak in the lake, and she said the lake was perfectly still. It just looked like a sheet of glass. There were no waves, no wind, nothing. But yet the man in the kayak was drifting, and she could see as she watched that he drifted across to the other side. And she thought about that, and she thought it must be the current deep underneath that is moving the kayak, because nothing on top was. And that's kind of like our lives, that we have this current deep inside us, this flow of love that guides us, that moves us if we are in touch with it. I think that that current of love is especially important at this time of year. This time of year when there's hope and joy and we see all the things around us. And it calls us to reach out to others, to share that love that we have deep inside of us with other people. I heard somewhere, and I don't remember where now, but I heard the statement Be especially kind to those that you meet, because you don't know what they might be going through. And I think that is so true. In this congregation, just the ones of us who are here, I am sure that there are some here who have concerns and burdens that no one else knows about, or at least not everyone else knows about. Something that is deep inside of you that is happening, that is something you kind of keep inside. But that is why when we meet people, and we do at Christmas time on the street, in the mall, wherever we happen to be especially kind, because you don't know the problems that they might be going through. And just a word, or just a smile, or a touch of someone you know may make the difference in how they feel. Because that current of love that runs through all of us means that we're connected. We're all part of each other. We have that connection of divinity within us. At this retreat that I went to, Paula said that, she told us a story about the connection, the love that we feel for others, even though we may not know them. And she said that during the war, when Hitler was invading Hungary, that the Hungarians were trying to flee and cross the border over into Austria. And sometimes they would do it at night under cover so that they wouldn't be found. And they would go in circles because they didn't know where the border was at times. And so the Austrian farmers started burning fires so that they could see those fires and know the direction to go that would lead them to the Austrian border, to the other side. And it said that when they ran out of wood and had used all the wood they had to build these big fires, they started burning their crops so that the Hungarians had a path to follow, a place to go. And that is the spirit of love that is common. Whether you know people, whether you don't know them, they are brothers and sisters. And at Christmas time especially, we think of that love that flows from God, the source, to us and through each other. Sometimes people may only need to know the source of that love. And they may need to know that there is a source, that there is being, there is a source that gives life and love and is part of our very being. We may have to do as the Austrians did at times. We may have to be the kindling that starts the fire that leads the way to safety. We may have to be that safety net for someone else that helps them to find that love. Personally, this Advent season calls me to give birth to new insights and understanding in my life. It calls me to love and let that love penetrate my heart and my soul so that I may shed confining beliefs that strangle greater truths. It calls me to tear down security walls that fence me off from others. It calls me to more fully give my life and being away. When I let go of all of these boundaries that bind me, that hold me, the God who is without limits always meets me there. God is always at that threshold that we're crossing into a new truth or new understanding, and goes with us because God is summoning us. I believe that Advent invites us to dare to cross new thresholds that will lead us to live more fully, love extravagantly, and dare to be all that each of us has the capacity to be. Kim is going to share a testimony, and then I will close with a poem.
Good morning. It's great to be with you. I know that many of you don't know me. I go to Carrier Parkway with Barbara, where she goes to church, and we were talking about her upcoming sermon, and she had asked me to ride over with her, and the topic of thresholds came about, and we went to the same retreat about thresholds. And I thought, well, I could maybe share a little something about that. There's a threshold that's looming in my life. My husband recently accepted a job in Mobile, Alabama, and he's going to move and start work on the 2nd of January. And I'm not. I'm going to stay here. I have a job and we have a house. And so for the first time in 30 years, I'll be alone. And that's a very different experience for me. As my mother lives with me, and she's also moving to a different place. And so I've never lived by myself. I went right from my home to getting married. And so it's going to be a very interesting time, and I'm a little scared and kind of looking forward to it at the same time. But it's a threshold, and I thought, well, if I spend my days in fear of that threshold, I will miss the joy that runs through life. Because every day there's a choice to live in fear or to walk through the portal that's open, the threshold that waits before us. And I want to live every day in that joy instead of every day cowering behind the door and not wanting to go through that threshold. I have a little quote from a book by the lady who we went to hear at the retreat a couple weeks ago. It says, "Thresholds demand a willingness to walk in a new direction. They ask us to not know. They insist that we be led where we never intended to go. They speak of a love far different from the one we know. They call us to awaken from sleep and see the world for the first time." So as I anticipate mine in life, I look to see the world in a new way and give place to what may be waiting to be birthed in me in my life.
It is not over, this birthing process. There are always newer skies into which God can throw stars. There are always new thresholds to cross. When we begin to think that we can predict the advent of God, that we can box the Christ in a stable in Bethlehem, that's just the time that God will be born in a place that we can't imagine and won't believe. May God bless each of us this Advent season as we become more aware of that divine presence that dwells in us, in everyone, in everything, and everywhere, is my prayer.